Before we head on over to our regular podcast programming, I'd like to ask you for a favor. We hope you've been enjoying listening to the Retail Redefined podcast so far, listening to all the conversations we've been having with different thought leaders within our firm and in the industry about retail design and the future of it. So if you've been enjoying listening to the podcast, please head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. We would really appreciate it so much, and more reviews would allow us to have the opportunity to reach more people. So if you could please just head on over to Apple Podcasts and click Write a Review under the review section of the Retail Redefined podcast. We would appreciate that so much. Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome to the Retail Redefined podcast, a podcast that is all about retail, design, and the future of it. And I'm your host, Chriselle. On this week's episode, we are featuring Napoleon Meraña, who is a senior designer here at RDC with over 25 years of experience and experience designing all throughout Europe as well as here in the US. We're focusing on his design process. And although we have talked about design process on the podcast before, back in season 1, we are taking a slightly different approach this time because Napoleon likes to utilize 3D physical modeling as a key part of his process. And while this form of designing, this style, this method is not new, it's something that was around before computers, and some would even call it old school. Napoleon utilizes it to his advantage even today. And it's something that has not been a normal part of RDC's design process, at least in the last few years. And bringing it back has inspired, some of the younger designers here to, create more 3D physical models and to start utilizing them when they design too. So I really enjoyed his conversation. I enjoy talking to Napoleon always, so I hope you learned something too. Stay tuned. Hey Napoleon, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Chriselle?
I'm doing all right. Thank you so much for coming on to the show today.
Yes, my pleasure.
Well, I'm really excited to have you talk with us a little bit about your design process because I think you're bringing something to this firm that even though some people would say it's a little bit more old school, it's kind of refreshing. So with having said all that, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I have about, let's say, a good 25 years experience. My background, I studied at SCI-Arc, Southern California Institute of Architecture, starting in 1991 when the riots began and ended when the recession started in 1996. And my first job out of school was working at Daniel Libeskind in Berlin, where I had to go to, basically I had to go to Berlin because my wife at the time was having a baby, and my son was born there. So we did that tour, worked at Daniel Libeskind, worked on a competition, and then we moved to Vienna. And then I worked at Himmelblau there for about 2.5 years, and an assortment of other Austrian architects. I was very fortunate to be kind of connected to Wolf Pree, who is the design principal at Co-op Himmelblau. So he kind of threw me around until he found something for me to do. And then eventually I ended up working for him doing about 10 competitions in a row, nonstop. And then after that, I came back to the States, worked for a good friend doing some residential, and then eventually worked in retail, more like doing interiors and small shops, mainly for an office called ODG, where we did like really kind of alternative branding and design for retail shops. Like my first big project was for Tony Hawk's prototype rollout, which was great because I didn't get to meet Tony, but I met his sister. who was basically very instrumental in terms of how she wanted the shop. You know, she was kind of the spokeswoman for him.
Mm-hmm.
But it was cool. They loved the concept. You know, the concept was basically an ollie.
Yeah.
Right? It's the first thing you
Yeah.
learn in
Mm-hmm.
skateboarding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a pop-up, and so that's basically reflected in the design. And then from then I did a couple other stints at some other interior design offices, mainly doing retail. So I had a lot of
Okay.
retail experience, mainly doing interiors like Adidas flagship stores and stuff like that. And then eventually I got another job working at Frank Gehry's office
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of years. So there I did a lot of, you know, I was working in the design with Edwin Chan, who's basically the kind of project designer, who's Frank's left-hand guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I was one of the guys who was basically like a left hand to Edwin in what we call the design box.
Mm-hmm.
And this design box is where everything happens with the main designer and Frank.
Hmm.
So it's very exclusive, and then outside that box is the production, like
Oh,
guys
okay.
scanning, putting drawings together, finishing models.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I was, you know, afforded to just play and mess with shapes all day, which was kind of fun, but also a little bit weird, just because of like, where's the architecture?
Yeah.
That was my education, but I learned a lot. I learned how to really understand how things are built formally,
Mm-hmm.
especially with special construction methods and approaches to how to look at construction and design. So I did Frank for a couple of years, and then I moved on to John Jurdy,
Mm-hmm.
who's my biggest influence to this day, because at John's I got to work on 1 million square foot and up
Yeah.
as a
So
normal.
really large scale projects.
Yeah, and it's normal, and so I can tackle like 100,000 square feet, or, you know, of
That's nothing.
area.
That's nothing for you.
Yeah, like I love the idea of being able to master plan,
Yeah.
because it's all relative, even big to small. It's kind of, you still have to plan circulation and
Mm-hmm.
relationships and
Mm-hmm.
programmatic, you know, like hierarchies.
Yeah.
So you can apply these methods into something really big or something really small, and that's what I was taught, how to kind of like bump and scale up and down,
Mm-hmm.
but seeing kind of like the bigger picture and really seeing like always like not the day one, but it's all about like further down the road,
Yeah.
its impact.
Mm-hmm.
And then to this day, that's kind of like my biggest influence is John, and now I'm here at RDC, you know, and I've been having a lot of fun. It's like, yes, I kind of do things a little bit old school, but I don't see it as old school. It's just kind of my method,
Yeah.
and I try to be as efficient as possible, because I understand that, you know, if I'm making models for weeks and it's not, you know, it's not really moving a project forward. It's
Yeah.
really, I make models in order to communicate.
Yeah.
It's something you don't, you know, in a 2D drawing, you don't see the backside.
Yeah.
You don't see the return. You don't see the corners. So this addresses all the potential issues that can come up. And, you know, I also like being able to see something physical. Who doesn't like models?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, for the most part, people are tactile, so
Yeah.
it helps to see something in person.
Yeah, and it's our profession. You know, we make stuff.
Mhm.
And I also make models to test ideas, because if I can't build it in a model, I can't build it in reality. I mean, there's some complex stuff that today we can afford to do with robots,
Yeah.
and computers have, you know, advanced our profession so much that I feel very comfortable to almost design anything,
Mm-hmm.
just because we have automation, and, you know, we have great programs like, for example, Rhino and Grasshopper, which is kind of like industry standard, along with Revit, which is basically, you know, production,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I understand all these facets, and I try to, you know, put them together.
Mm-hmm.
And for the office, I think it's great, because this office has a lot of potential,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to like bring its game up in terms of like the design, and they're already doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it just needs to, bringing in different people with different influences, you know, I think healthy, and
Yeah.
I've been very supported, which I'm very happy about to this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, you kind of talked about it already. I was going to ask you, why the biggest and most noticeable thing about how you design in this office in particular is how you do make physical models of everything. And You kind of answered that question already, where I was going to ask you, why do you still create 3D models when everything is digitized? But like you said, we want to be able to see the whole thing, and like you said, you do it for testing, and you also said that you're efficient too, so that also helps.
Right. I mean, when I make the model, I also first sketch it and then build it in 3D. Then I build the model. So it's not like the model's going first necessarily, because I have to create the base information.
Yeah.
So I already have a 3D model of it done. So it's just proving it and making sure, understanding the relationships in kind of a real material.
Yeah.
Helps me to kind of understand how to design something and see all these bigger relationships you don't really understand when you're looking at something. And then I like to zoom out a little bit before I zoom back in. And what I learned at Frank's, for example, he uses like 3 models, up to 3 models sometimes, like 1 to 50, 1 to 1,000, and 1 to 25,
wow.
depending on. So he's jumping scales.
Yeah.
But that's a luxury.
Yeah.
Like he has somebody doing that for him. I do it myself until I can get like a really good team where I can work with people who like, we jump on it and just crank it out. And we communicate it to the office. It's like, this is how it works. And not all projects are going to have models, but if I have a chance, I do it.
And I'm sure clients really appreciate it as well.
Oh, totally. It helps to kind of move the project forward in terms of like things they haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Right? They actually like understand, oh, that's mine.
Yeah.
Right? And that's how you want to do something. And, we have to be more critical about how we kind of show our work. And I try to do things kind of like, I come from the school of Frank where it's all design studies. Nothing is precious. Nothing is sacred. It's like you can break something off or you can move something without feeling like it's, like endangering, right? So, and so design models are usually just like scrappy, like really rough. So you don't have to feel like you can't touch it.
Yeah. So did you have to learn to be okay with things not being sacred in design, or was that something that you were already used to or was already ingrained into your mind early on?
No, I had to learn because, like every design student, they kind of get into what they do and they own it and they understand it, and it's the whole idea is trying to communicate it. But I've had experiences where I do something like for Wolf one time. He asked me to build him a model, and it was really terrible. He hated it, right? And he just berated me, and I was like, okay. Came back the next day. He's like, "Where's that model?" I said, "Oh, I threw it away." He goes, "Never throw it away." He goes, "That's process." And sometimes when you do something ugly, it kind of informs a person what ugly means in order to say what's beautiful. Yeah. Right? Like you don't always get it right the first time. So I've also learned to kind of communicate ideas where it's like, we're not trying to make it perfect. Yeah. Right? It's almost giving everybody a little bit of room to put their 2 cents in it. Right?
Okay. For those of you who are wondering, Wolf is Brian Wolf. He's one of the principals here.
Sorry. It's Wolf Pre.
Oh, just kidding.
No. It's another guy. He's the design principal for Co-op Himmelblau, who I work for in Austria.
Oh, so you learned early on in your career then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No. Like, I've been doing this, like I said, for 25 years. So, once it was like my second job outside of school. I've had other jobs before. Like I was a drafter. So I have a lot of training in terms of just like old school stuff. I used to draw by hand. Yeah. I was the last class to actually draw by hand in my school, and then the transition to like AutoCAD and Photoshop 1, where you couldn't like do Command Z or do any, it was like very cumbersome. Yeah. So I had to learn quickly from analog to digital. And well, since you were just fresh out of college, I would imagine it was fairly easy for you to adapt, right? Yes and no. What was good, I had the background skills. Like I knew how to draw descriptive geometry. That's very complex objects and different views, but and getting them right was part of what we do in architecture. But then the digital stuff was also cumbersome in the beginning because it wasn't like I could do it faster by hand than the computer because it wasn't, you know, it had to catch up to us.
Yeah.
But now we have to catch up to it kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I have the good basic foundation of how things work in terms of, like, for example, drawing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I've done it so long. It's like I know how to handle it, and that doesn't freak me out anymore. I just go for it and just produce something, and if it's not right, we'll fix it.
Yeah.
But at least now we know it's not right.
Yeah. Okay, well, something that really interests me is that, you know, you started your career in Europe because that's where your wife was, and I just want to know, how was living in Europe and designing in Europe and working for those firms in Europe, how is it different than here in the US, and how has it affected how you design here in the US, you know?
Well, I mean, I worked in Austria and Germany, so those countries spoke German. And I knew a little bit of German, but, you know, architecture is like a kind of universal language because it's, you know, they have words for everything, like in English, that you can translate easily or figure it out. We didn't have Google at the time, so I couldn't just like Google everything, but you know, I was good at asking a lot of questions and just kind of listening carefully how the conversation, you know, there's context to every conversation, so if I can pick up one or two words, I can put it, so I had to do a lot of like figuring out of the language. But I was in a design office where we were doing like crazy stuff. You know, like they asked me to do a competition in Greece, and the concept was like a swirl cake. I had to get like a cake that had swirls inside, cut it up, photocopy it, and then build every section. I mean, it was just like, really, we're gonna turn this into a building? So for a long time, I used to question what we did, and after like a couple months, I would just like do it. You know, it was just like, this is fun.
So would you say that designing in Europe is a lot different than here in the US?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Like the European experience for me was just mainly, it was more like the cultural and language barrier. But the architecture is all the same. It's just they have different kind of priorities. In Europe, it's colder. They have to build to the climate. I mean, in LA, we don't build to the climate. We build to like, you know, what do we build to? You know, like something more
build whatever we want.
Something more temporal, right?
Yeah.
It's more open. It's like we don't have to worry about like
snow,
ceiling or, it's like our stuff is just kind of just like it's kind of nice here, especially in Los Angeles. So, you know, having grown up here and then going to Europe, I saw the difference, right? It was like 180 in terms of like methods of construction and like design sensibilities. So that's why like all the Europeans that come here like love it, because it's like, oh, they're so free and light.
Oh,
right?
okay.
And they have an opportunity to like test out ideas that they couldn't do there.
So would you say it's more restrictive over there because of the priorities and how?
It's not necessarily restrictive. It's just they have higher standards because they have weather. They have to seal things. They have to make sure these things don't leak because they have snow and they have lots of rain, and these things have to hold up longer than our structures here in LA because we just have the sun beating down on it. And we'll have an occasional rain. You see what happens here in LA when it rains. It's like the whole place goes...
Everyone goes crazy.
Yeah, it's madness. So there is a difference, but, you know, you apply to what you know, to whatever condition you're kind of...
I mean, yeah, that's, I guess, regardless of what country you're in and where you're at.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious if, like, there was anything about the process there that was different. But okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, I worked for Daniel Libeskind, who's an American in Berlin.
Oh, okay.
And he was doing the Jewish Museum at the time. But, you know, Daniel's like, he's a very intellectual guy, and he has a very, like, specific design sensibility. But, you know, I learned from him how to just be very, very methodical, right? But also just, it's okay to wing it.
Yeah.
And then to see what happens come out of it, like a happy accident. Because, you know, design comes from nothing.
Yeah.
It comes from your creativity. It's like what you put into it. So whatever you put on the table is something that can communicate, and either communicate something good or bad, or it depends on your like design values, you know, how you kind of approach it.
Yeah. So when you say wing it, I'm assuming you're talking about like the client doesn't give you a ton of direction and you just...
No, you have some direction, but you kind of have to explore ideas. And so it's not necessarily about what the client wants, it's like how you interpret with the client. And then you start putting it through kind of like a grinder of things like, all right, does it work with these conditions, right? Does it apply based on client needs? You know, like I did a lot of competitions where there were no needs. They were just like very specific in one area, and we had an idea. But now, you know, we work with clients, and sometimes the clients don't really know what they want. You know, I've experienced that many times where they're just like I had a Chinese client that said, I just want a building on top of a building, and everything else he said I just disregarded, because it was like, that's the most important thing I understood, was like he had the desire for something. And so I would latch on to certain kind of things that I thought, well, that could be applicable or interesting in terms of an approach to design.
So when a client doesn't know what they want, how do you, besides latching on to like some of the key things that they say, how do you figure out what they want? Or do you just design based on what you think it should look like, and you let them tell you what they don't like about it?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you know, every client has a kind of, they come to you with kind of needs or desires, or kind of like a program, but it's not, they don't know what the architecture is going to look like, right? And so our job is to kind of come up with a concept based on what they want out of it, in terms of like, okay, if it's a manufacturing, you know, it's got to make sure it works as a manufacturing. Or if it's like a school, it's got to work like a school. But then we have to interject like ideas about how to make a school, you know, interesting for the kids and learning. You know, like creating this environment, like a total environment where it's like, it's inspiring. You know, it's like, what do you want to put into it, right? How do you want the kids, you know, if the client doesn't really tell you, you kind of like, here's an opportunity. And you don't shove it down their throat. You kind of just present it to them as a kind of idea. And most of the time, you know, they'll tell you what they want. And if they don't, then there's your opportunity to kind of slide it in, you know, where you like have an opportunity to like get your ideas across where it can be meaningful, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole point. You know, do something meaningful and like put something in this world that's like everybody can enjoy, but you're not going to please everybody.
So I've obviously seen some of the models that you've made over the last few months, and if you're listening to this episode, I will put some of his models on our website. But it's very interesting, because like I said, it's kind of refreshing, even though, you know, some would call it a little bit old school, but it's very tactile, like I said, and it's kind of cool to see the concept come to life. Like, you were designing for one of our clients, and you said that you had to, your assignment was to just make it a store that it can be moved around and changed very easily. And you had a camera, and you had the model, and you had some of the pieces, and you kind of wrote a note saying, please create whatever you want and take a photo of it. I thought that was a really cool thing to do. And for me, I'm not a designer, obviously, I thought for me that was it was cool for me because I got to participate in that.
Sure.
So I don't know, it's kind of cool to get a taste of your process. And you had said that it was good when you presented some of those ideas.
Yeah, I mean, like that was a very specific kind of application where the client didn't have a site, and they want us to design a store without a site. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to design something that have no walls. So I'm going to design like furniture, right, where it's modular, it's flexible. You can reconfigure it any way you want, and adaptable. That's what happens. It's like being a homeless guy, right? That's kind of like what this project was. It's like we had no home, but we had all this product, and where we're going to put it, and so how do we do it? So we create little homes for them. But the homes are very, you know, we had security in them, we had like utility built into them, we had like mobility, we had like all these things that we built into this one little thing that can expand into a store. They really liked it, but at the same time, well, that's not what we wanted, and we kind of reiterated, yes, of course, that's not what you want because you didn't give us anything to really put it in. But this is how you approach something where you don't have four walls to kind of work with. but at least we got 2 check boxes that didn't exist before checked.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah, it wasn't totally fruitless.
How, and, I've seen that when you do these models, obviously you're not always working on them by yourself. You usually have someone, a younger staff with you working on it. How has it been kind of working with them through these models when maybe I'm sure they've made physical models in school, but maybe like as far as work goes, they're not doing that too much. I don't know if I'm sure it's really engaging.
Well, there's some, so far here, there's everybody who's kind of helped me. Obviously I make it that it's kind of fun and easy, because I basically set up everything that needs to be done. They don't have to think, because I know how I want it, and I just follow what I want.
Okay.
Because then it's easier, especially if you don't make models. And for example, I had a really good example is one of the interns in the interior design group, Jen. She said she's never made a model before, so I'm like, nope, we're making models, and we're making design models, and she had a blast. She didn't know she can do it. She made beautiful models, and I almost didn't believe her. Like, you've never made a model before? How can you not have? And what I see is very articulate, right? And she was totally excited.
Yeah.
And that's the key. It's like you get excited about designing something, and it's fun, right? And then you kind of understand what you're doing, and then you draw it, then you produce the drawings for it, but at least you have this whole process, which I think is super important.
So your process is typically doing it digitally on the computer in 2D, then you do 3D, and then you make the physical
first
model.
I get the site or whatever it is, and I make basically I figure out the constraints, like what's the property size, what are the boundaries, what are the setbacks. I establish all the constraints that I require for this massing of a building to be, let's say, that you can see it, in its final massing form. And then that's what you work with. You work inside of this thing. Can't build outside of it.
So, with the models that you've made, you're usually using kind of a little bit of everything. I know you do use a lot of styrofoam, and I think you use cardboard and things like that, but then I've also seen you use rocks and cords and things like that. But with 3D printing, do you ever create any of your models in a 3D printer, or do you prefer to be able to build it yourself and using some of these different materials?
The 3D printing for me is more like a finished model.
Okay.
Like when you have a design that's kind of flushed out, right? That you've kind of broke up and beat up and scratched, and then finally it's kind of come to a point where it's just that's it. It's doing everything that we needed to do. Then we make a finished model. Then we make then we print it out or laser cut it to be much more precise, because architecture is very precise. The models are just purely the way I see the models are like a sketch, right? When you sketch something, it always has room for other people to look at it and have ideas. But if I hardline something where it's just a rendering, that wood is that wood.
Yeah.
That glass is that glass, and everything is kind of fixed. So I try to make the models much more kind of approachable, where people can still interject ideas. When it's for me, I'm always open for that, because I don't believe that it's it needs to be kind of a group effort.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you and I were talking before we started recording, you had said that when you were in school, as part of learning about the processes and everything, you learned how to make every single thing. And you said you even, including the materials that you used, you were talking about how you learned how to do Japanese calligraphy and things like that. And I'm curious, what has been the overlap between doing those things and designing in the context of architecture? Because I haven't, again, I'm not a designer, so when you said those things, I thought that was it sounded like it made sense, but it wasn't something that I'd heard from talking to people who are closer to my age here and what they're doing in school. I don't think anyone is.
Well, when I went to school at the time, it was pretty interesting time only because, culturally there was a lot of things happening. Architecture was also kind of trying to figure out its way. And my school that I went to at SciArc was still very hands-on. Like, we had, like, amazing teachers who were actually practicing, like, experimenting in their own studios, and they'd come back to us, and we'd basically be their guinea pigs. Well, that's how school works, right? You have an idea, like, you have 50 students, that's 50 different ideas that can be tested out. And if you're a smart student, you actually can pay attention to what's going on and see what everybody's doing and how people are approaching it. And so you're exposed to that. And so I was exposed to, like, how to build everything. I mean, because the guys I work with, they were experimenting. Like, we had one guy who would, like, make us take musical instruments and take it apart.
Oh my gosh.
And make a form out of it. Make sculptures. But it's like we learned how to be sensible, like have sensibility to materials, how to cut things, how to look at things critically, where to cut, where not to cut. I mean, it was like all these exercises in kind of form making, and that was like super valuable because you can't do that anywhere else. When you get out of school, the whole reality of practical practice comes in, and then one day those things will kind of pop back up, and I've just been fortunate to, like, stay in that world.
Yeah.
Because that's what I wanted to do. Like, it was very clear. I didn't, it seemed when I was younger, I thought, like, well, where's this going to go? But I enjoyed it so much that I just kept doing it, and now it's taking me to this point where it's like I'm very clear about what I want to do and how I want to do it, and hopefully still remain supportive of doing it.
Yeah. It sounds like, when a lot of people are in school, they always wonder, what is the practicality of this? How am I going to apply this in the real world? But it sounds like for you, a lot of what you learned in school, you have been able to actually apply in the real world.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, we built furniture, right? And then building furniture is, super precise. And you have to understand the materials, and, you have to plan a lot ahead of time. So even a small little thing can apply to a really big thing. Like I told you, I also had a Japanese teacher who made us make our own ink in the morning, and then do calligraphy and build frames for our pictures and make our own paper. I mean, we did all this stuff. Wow. And it was like fun, But we also understood the properties of all these materials, and like how long things take, and why these things work. And it's just it's like the more skills you have added on to your arsenal of, like, design approaches, the better.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're more open too, because, like, it's infinite. You can just do anything.
Yeah.
I'm always testing out stuff. Like, the last project I did, I used fruit. To make,
I saw that.
To make a massing model, just to kind of, like, look at something and, like, all right, the fruit has color, and I can use the color as program, and then it's easy to cut, and I'm pretty kind of comfortable with proportions and actually putting on a set, and it was funny, But then it was like, okay, that's it, move on. But at least I got it started.
Yeah.
Now I'm, like, motivated, right? Like, I saw a form, and then I can keep going to kind of, like, almost like in search of.
Okay.
Right? And then all the things that make that form viable, like there's program, there's circulation, there's, this many rooms and all this stuff. So it's like, I feel like it's like you get a sock and you stuff it, and then all these things suddenly create a form. Right? The sock holds it together, but all that stuff is inside.
Yeah.
But now it looks like weird. And then you can keep adjusting it as it goes.
That's so, I saw that model yesterday. And that was really funny. That's really awesome. I would imagine that more people would make 3D models because it does sound very, it makes a lot of sense. And in terms of, being able to see everything, it sounds very practical, but I can see why most people don't nowadays, just because of the time constraints.
Right.
So, and for you, you said you're efficient, right? So you're able to just...
Well, I have like, I've been doing it for a while. So, for example, I have tools that are very, like, I brought this foam cutter, like a wire cutter, into the office. It's very precise. right? It's fast.
Oh, that's your own.
Yeah, it's mine. But the office bought one finally, which is great.
Oh, okay.
You know, but I brought this myself. That's because otherwise I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it. I just brought my own stuff. I brought my own material. I brought all my tools. Everything I used for the first 2 months were all mine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the office is surprised. Like, where did you get all this stuff, right? Like, well, because I brought it. It was the only way I can actually work. And I didn't think I would be doing that, but I just did it because I'm like, well, I don't know any other way, especially to do something that big,
Mm-hmm.
or depending on the project.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked on some pretty big projects here, and it's
Yeah.
just kind of like, I had to do it, and I
Yeah.
had to force the guys who work with me to do it, and they were not very happy in the beginning, but
I
then
remember.
But in the end, they were like, they were very proud
Yeah.
because everybody can see it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you can see it, you have to do it right.
Yeah, one of your first projects here, you guys stayed up all night and you guys made how many different iterations of that? You made
Well,
like five or
everybody,
six?
everybody made a scheme, which was there's 4 or 5 of us, and we made 2 final schemes, and yeah, we really pushed it. It was really fun because I was new. I was new to everybody. Everybody was new to me, but we all have the skill sets, and I think I'm pretty good at seeing what people are good at.
Mm-hmm.
And if I see like you're strong in something, I'm just gonna work you, right? And then when it's time for you to learn
Mm-hmm.
on your weaknesses, I'll also like ease you into it. And I had the same thing. Like, I'm strong in certain things and I'm weak in other things, so I try to balance it out with
Mm-hmm.
people, because I don't want to be like. I believe in like balancing.
Yeah.
And not forcing. That's kind of my whole thing this year, is not to force anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Forcing as in like how you interact with people,
No,
or
just,
even in design?
Designing, don't shove
Okay.
it. Like, find a way to make it ease.
So if it doesn't work, don't try to fit
Yeah.
a square
Yeah.
into a square
Exactly.
peg into a circle hole.
Exactly. That's kind of that's not only in design. That's like in life.
Yeah.
That's how I want to apply everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's where I'm at.
Well, that's really awesome. Thank you so much for talking with me. It's kind of cool to see you kind of go through your process because, like I said, as someone who's not really familiar with this industry and I'm still kind of learning,
Mm-hmm.
it's really cool to see how your mind works. And I think everyone in the office finds it very refreshing because, we get to see, yes, the back of the office is kind of a mess all the time, but I mean, it's really cool to see these designs coming to life before they even can come to life, so to speak.
in any high-end design office who are testing boundaries and pushing design, you have models.
Mm-hmm.
You have guys who are like pushing it. That's just my personal experience.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate to work with like some very, very, high-profile architects. And the whole reason why I work for them is not because I like their forms or style. I just want to know how they build it.
Yeah.
I want to know what's the attitude about like convincing somebody that yes, we want to build this for lots of money, and we're gonna do it this way.
Yeah.
Like listening to Frank Gehry, like talk to his clients and be involved and hearing like how he convinced that client to just.
So you're even talking about like the process of the negotiation
Yes,
too,
everything.
because I would imagine that when you are in a design office and you're making designing those buildings that you see, I don't know, that become like landmarks.
Yeah.
It's not cheap.
No. And it's like also the whole thing is like you have to convince the client, so that's why you make models. For example, Himmelblau, they made the craziest buildings, but they basically start from a sketch and they build the sketch into a model and the model into a building, but after the sketch they make a model so precise, that it's real. Like it's convincing, right? Like the translation from 2D to 3D is like 1-to-1, so you can't argue it, right?
Yeah.
The only argument you have is like, I don't like it, I don't want to pay for it. Okay, fine.
Yeah. It's very interesting.
But that's not where it starts and stops.
Of course. Of course. But anyway, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It's been really cool. I'll display some of your models on our website for people who are interested in seeing more.
Okay.
Thank you, Napoleon.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for this week's episode. Thank you so much, Napoleon, for being on the show this week and for talking to me. And I hope you all were able to learn a little bit about his perspective. I found his experience in Europe to be quite interesting because I think even though, as he said, it's very similar to designing in America, I think a lot of the cultural aspects and the mindset also have affected how Napoleon thinks and processes his designs today. So anyway, that's all we have for this week's episode. I will see you guys again next week, and I'll see you soon.